Robbins.
All right, Wisconsin. Hi there. Hi back there. I'm here today to talk to our friends in the Democratic Party that feel Bernie in their hearts but are supporting Hillary with their pragmatic brains. These are not bad people. They fear the Republicans' radical and dangerous divisiveness as much as we do. We've all been fed a steady stream of simplistic propaganda that furthers the establishment's narrative, that Hillary is the presumptive nominee. This narrative is strong and persuasive. It's been promulgated for months by CNN and the New York Times and by so many in the mainstream media. And if we were sheep, if we had gotten in line, there would be no problem now. The media and the ghosts of the DLC would have had their way, and government would carry on as it has carried on for the last 30 years. Establishment figures would get elected and re-elected without any accountability for their bad decisions. Outsider candidates like Bernie Sanders would be marginalized and tolerated for a few primaries before falling in line with the Democratic Party structure. But the DNC and the Clintons have a big problem. Times have changed. Bernie is not Howard Dean. Bernie is not the obligatory progressive that will keep the left in line until the presumptive moderate nominee emerges. Bernie is not the Democratic Party insider that will bow down to the wishes of the elite of the party. We are done with that patriarchy. We are done with compromising our ideals. We are done with triangulation and fear-based politics. Now, I understand our friends' resistance to Bernie Sanders. They've been told repeatedly by the mainstream media that Bernie doesn't matter, that he's unelectable. Well, I'm here today to encourage our Democratic friends that want big change to happen, yet don't believe that it is possible. Our friends that believe that they are not worthy of dreaming big. Our friends that have surrendered their ideals to political pragmatism, that somehow believe that change will happen by choosing a candidate entirely entrenched in the dysfunctions of the past. There are moments in history where political pragmatism can lead to disaster, where a politician's future ambitions compromise their constituents' safety and security. These are the moments that define the man or the woman. Will that individual risk their political future because of their beliefs? Will they risk being marginalized as radicals and extremists? All of us that opposed the Iraq War were marginalized. We were called radicals. We were called extremists, terrorist supporters, for demanding evidence of weapons of mass destruction before we invaded. How radical was that? We were shouted down by the mainstream media. We were threatened. And some were intimidated into silence or compliance. Not Bernie. Bernie faced that same intimidation and remained steadfast. And those that did the politically expedient thing, that didn't ruffle feathers in an attempt to remain within the status quo, in an attempt to retain their positions of power, These people were rewarded. In the media, they were promoted. In politics, they were reelected. Some even received medals for getting it wrong. There were no apologies. There was no reckoning. There was no accountability. This was a defining moment for our country. The good news is that there are millions of thinking, feeling people in this country that, despite the massive propaganda that buoys up this failure, still hold on to the truth. And that truth is that the Iraq War is and was a bellwether. How you voted on this truly matters, because it winded us up in such a morass. This was a time in our history where political pragmatism led to a massive disaster to our economy, a disaster to our world standing, a disaster in the lives lost in this manufactured war. We cannot afford to go down that road again. No, CNN, because you ignore Bernie doesn't make him go away. The New York Times can ignore on its front page Bernie's victories in Washington, Hawaii, and Alaska. We are no longer surprised. We get it. You want Bernie to go away. You want your anointed candidate to win. After the Southern primaries, you had called the election. And who's fooling who? Winning South Carolina in a Democratic primary is about as significant as winning Guam. No Democrat is going to win in South Carolina in the general election. Why do these victories have so much significance? Who is winning independents? Not Hillary. Who is winning the young vote that will do the hard work of canvassing and organizing and turning out the vote? Not Hillary. Who has won the last 6 out of the last 7 contests and clearly has momentum on their side? And who's going to win tomorrow in Wisconsin? Perhaps the people in this country are voting this way because they are no longer willing to reward the failures of pragmatists and war-supporting Democrats. Perhaps the people of this country want leaders that can see clearly and make the right decision regardless of the way the wind is blowing. Perhaps the voters want a candidate with integrity. With this primary season, we are once again at a moment in history where political pragmatism can lead to disaster. This concept that Hillary is the presumptive nominee has rankled a critical mass of people. No, they are saying to this anointing. No, they do not want to be told in a free and open democracy who to vote for. No, they will not be intimidated by moderates in the Democratic Party who have been on the wrong side of history. To the Democratic Party, you take this movement of Bernie voters for granted at your own peril. These people have had every opportunity to embrace your presumptive nominee. They have received your constant stream of publicity, suggesting Hillary is their anointed. They have been given the message, like everyone else, and they have overwhelmingly rejected this notion. No, they say, this is not my candidate. This is the candidate of a DLC Democratic Party that has brought us moderation when we needed bold action. This is the wing of the party that has brought us war and bank bailouts and mass incarceration. If Hillary had been on the right side of these issues, we would not be here today. We are here today because we want more out of our party. To start with, we would like an opposition party, a party that is truly for the working man and woman, a party that helps their constituents with actual policy, not just lip service, every election cycle that deals more with fear of the Republicans than with any actual change. We are the ones that marched against the Iraq war that Hillary voted for. We are the ones that have opposed for years the suicidal environmental future that politicians like Hillary have sanctioned with their support of the fossil fuel industry. We are the ones that marched against NAFTA. We are the ones that were outraged that the Democratic Party policies embraced a new strategy under Bill Clinton that demonized welfare mothers and supported legislation that disproportionately incarcerated African Americans in this war on drugs. We are the ones that opposed the tar sands pipeline that Hillary originally supported until she realized that it would be politically expedient for her to oppose. We are supporting a candidate that stood with us, that voted against the Iraq war, that is opposed to fracking, that voted against NAFTA, that is opposed to the death penalty. We are supporting a candidate that has throughout his career stood up for the working people, that has stood up for veterans, for the unemployed, for the poor, for abortion rights, for LGBT rights. We are supporting a candidate that has taken principled positions when others have compromised. We are supporting a candidate that has advocated for civil rights throughout his life, a man that marched with Martin Luther King, a man that advocates for those without a voice. We are supporting a candidate that has risked his political future time and again by remaining true to a strong moral commitment to peace and justice. And now the nation is starting to understand what the great people of Vermont understand, that have kept Bernie in office because he is a genuine voice, an honest voice, a principled man that stands his ground and votes his conscience. The good people of Vermont may not agree with him on all the issues, but they recognize Bernie as a man of integrity and consistently re-elect him. What a radical concept. A politician that has a moral bottom line. A politician that is not swayed by polls or reckless ambition or inner party pragmatism. Could Bernie Sanders be leading us into a new paradigm? A paradigm where one's previous actions actually are relevant to one's current campaign. A time where accountability actually matters, where politicians are held responsible for their bad policy decisions. A time where the expedient and pragmatic within the political and media establishment are no longer rewarded for their compliance and subservience to corporate interest and party politics. We are in a new time, and you here in this hall, on this day in Wisconsin, are leading us into a new future. You realize how important this election is. You are the visionaries that realize that the time is now. Now is the time for the truth. Now is the time for tolerance. Now is the time for love. Now is the time for unbridled idealism. Now is the time to dream big, the time to believe that we can actually accomplish great things beyond the accepted realm of possibility. Now is the time to elect a leader that will lead us into a future of prosperity, peace, and real progressive change. Now is the time for Bernie Sanders.
there are a lot of people to thank, and I'm going to do that in a moment, but let me just thank Tim. Tim is not only one of the great actors in our country, I think many of us have seen his movies, but what he has done, which a lot of celebrities do not do, is he has used his fame to fight for justice. He is right now working on a brilliant and important criminal justice issue dealing with recidivism and trying to stop the fact that so many of our people who leave jail end up coming back into jail. So, Tim, thank you all so much for what you have done. Let me also thank Carl Lays and Galen Goodwill and Pat Feldhusen and Sharon Wasilensky and Ryan Heyman and Christian Ellis and Eric Reimer and Eric Genrich for their introductory remarks and their work in the music. Well, we were here a few days ago, and we are back in Green Bay. The reason that we came back is we consider Green Bay to be one of the important locations in the state of Wisconsin that we're going to have to do really, really well in. And with your help, we will do well. Here's where we are. Let me be as honest as I can. As Tim mentioned, we have won 6 out of the last 7 caucuses and primaries. And the story tomorrow is pretty simple. If there is a large voter turnout, I believe we win. If there is a low voter turnout, we will probably lose. I think it's going to be a close election. So my request is to reach out and make contact with your friends and families and co-workers and let them understand how very, very important tomorrow's primary election is. Turns out that Wisconsin, not only because of the size of the number of delegates that you elect, but for whatever reason, Wisconsin has played a very pivotal role in selecting the Democratic nominees for the U.S. presidency. So let's do it again tomorrow. Let's bring out a large voter turnout. I think the point that Tim just made a moment ago is a point that I want to repeat. And that is, in 1,000 different ways, a lot of it has to do with media, we are taught to think small. We are taught not to believe that we can change the status quo. We are taught to believe that what exists today has to exist tomorrow and 10 years from now. But that does not have to be. If we have learned any lesson from history, that lesson is that real change never comes from the top on down. It comes from the bottom on up. And that's the history of America. And I want all of us just to recollect some of the major changes that have taken place in American society over the years. When you think about worker exploitation, when you think about the fact that 100 years ago or more, there were workers who worked 7 days a week, 15 hours a day. They had no say about anything. You're fired for whatever reason. You're hired for whatever reason. You can't negotiate a contract. You get this, you get that. And workers said, you know what? Working people are human beings. They're not beasts of burden. They will have dignity on the job. And against enormous opposition and pressure, they formed unions in order to protect the rights of workers and to end employee exploitation. That took place. What is the history of the civil rights movement? There was a few people on top who made it? No, it was not. For hundreds of years, from starting when slavery was in existence, African Americans and their allies said, we will continue the fight against racism, against segregation, against bigotry, because that is not what this country should be about. Many of those people went to jail. Some of those people were killed. Many were beaten. Many lost their jobs. I will never forget, I was in Birmingham, Alabama, a couple of months ago. Do you all remember that terrible incident where a church was bombed and 4 beautiful children were killed? You all remember that? I knew that, and I went to that church, but what the pastor there told me, which I did not know, should have known, I didn't know, there were 14 bombings in Birmingham in that month alone. 14 bombings trying to intimidate African Americans from getting the right to vote. It was, in a sense, a city then run by terrorists. And yet the people of that city stood up and fought back. And if you look at the women's movement, let's not forget, and many people do. Do you know what the condition of women in America was 100 years ago? 100 years ago, women did not have the right to vote. People say, that's not possible. That's 100 years ago. It's not a long time in historical context. Did not have the right to vote. Could not get the education they wanted. Could not do the jobs they wanted. And yet, the women of this country stood up with their male allies. They went to jail. Some of them died. Some of them went on hunger strikes to make certain that in America, women would not be treated as second-class citizens. All right? That was that fight. If we were in this room, and I want you to think about this, because this is the essence of what Tim was talking about and what I'm talking about. If we were in this room 10 years ago, no time at all, some person jumps up and says, you know, Bernie, I think that by the year 2015, gay marriage will be legal in 50 states in this country. The person next to them would have said, you're nuts, that can't happen. It did happen. And it happened again, because the gay community and their straight allies said that in America, people have the right to love whomever they want to love. And they took on all kinds of bigotry, all kinds of hatred. And to now, and up to now, right now, we have in 50 states legal gay marriage. Let me give you another example. And all of this is about how change takes place. If we were here 5 years ago, no time at all, and we had a meeting like this, somebody jumps up and says, you know, Bernie, this $7.25 an hour minimum wage is a starvation wage. And you know what, Bernie? We've got to double that minimum. We've got to raise that minimum wage up to $15 an hour. Now, go back 5 years, all right? 5 years. This is my point. 5 years ago, somebody said that. You know what the person next to them would have said? They would have said, you're nuts. Yeah, you're right, 7.25 is a starvation wage. You can't double it. You know, maybe you get $8, maybe we go to $9. I don't know, maybe it's even possible if we're really, really lucky to get $10 an hour. But then you know what happened? What happened is that workers in the fast food industry, workers at McDonald's, in Burger King, Wendy's, they went out on strike. And they stood up and they fought back and they talked to their communities. And then you know what happened a few years ago? Seattle passed $15 an hour. San Francisco, Los Angeles, $15 an hour. Oregon, $15 an hour. In the last couple of weeks, California, New York State, $15 an hour. So what my point is, and I think this was Tim's point, is that if we have a vision, if we are prepared to stand together, there are enormous things that we can accomplish. But if we accept the media's definition of what is possible, then we will accomplish very, very little. And I see a picture right here. Gentleman has a picture of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And as you all know, when Roosevelt came, that's really apt. When Roosevelt came to power in 1932, what he said to the American people is, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And he redefined at that moment the role of government and said, you know what, in a democracy, government has got to stand up for working people. And 4 years later, when he was renominated for his second term at the Democratic Convention, what he also said is, he said, I understand, I don't know the exact words, that all of what he called the economic royalists, all of the big money interests at that time, they hate my guts. I welcome their hatred, he said, because I'm going to stand with the working families of America. So that's kind of where we are today. And what I think is that at this pivotal moment in American history, the American people are looking around, and I've been all over this country from California to Maine, and people are beginning to say, you know what, the status quo is not acceptable. They're looking around them and they're saying, how does it happen that I have to work 2 or 3 jobs, and yet almost all new income and wealth is going to the top 1%? Not acceptable. How does it happen that in this great country, which once had such a proud middle class, that the middle class is now disappearing, and we have the most unequal distribution of wealth of any major country on earth? Today you have the top 1/10% now owning almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. That's exactly what people are saying all over this country, just in those words. It is not right. It is not acceptable. How does it happen that in the richest country in the history of the world, we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth? Now, we get used to these things, and this is Tim's point, this is my point. We get used to seeing people sleeping out on the streets. We get used to seeing veterans not getting the benefits that they earned. We get used to seeing more people in jail in America than any other country on earth. Disproportionately African American, Latino, and Native Americans. We get used to the fact that today in Wisconsin or today in Vermont, a woman is having a baby, a beautiful day. But if that woman is working class or low income, do you know what happens to her in 2 or 3 weeks? She's going to have to separate herself from her baby and go back to work to earn enough income to take care of that baby and her family. And that we are the only major country on earth that doesn't have paid family and medical leave. Unacceptable. Unacceptable. And that is what, in many ways, this campaign is about. It is demanding that the American people think outside of the box, think outside of the status quo, and create the kind of nation that all of us know we can create. Now, one quick way of knowing what a Sanders administration will look like is to take a hard look at the administration here in Wisconsin of Scott Walker and then think just the opposite. And let me start on something that I feel really passionately, strongly about. And that is that we have Republican governors all over this country, including Governor Walker, who are working overtime trying to suppress the vote. Okay, now we, as you know, in our country, we all have conservative friends Honest people can disagree about anything. But I should hope that there is no disagreement that in an American democracy, we want to do everything that we can to involve more people in the political process, not to make it harder for people to vote. So what Governor Walker and Republican governors all over this country are doing, trying to make it harder for young people, for old people, for poor people, for people of color to participate in the political process. I regard that as political cowardice of the worst kind. And what I say to Governor Walker and all the other Republican governors, if you don't have the guts to participate in free, fair, and open elections, get out of politics, get another job. Governor Walker wants to suppress the vote. If elected president, we are going to make it easier for people to participate in the political process. Bottom line is, you're 18 years of age or older, you're an American citizen, you are entitled to vote in the United States. I want us to have one of the highest voting turnout rates in the world, not one of the lowest. Now, when we talk about democracy, there's another aspect that we have to deal with. Governor Walker is good pals with the Koch brothers, who I gather support him financially. I am not a good friend of the Koch brothers. In fact, I think it is incredibly undemocratic that as a result of this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, you now have a handful of billionaires, the Koch brothers being at the top of that list, who are prepared to spend some $900 million in this election cycle to elect candidates who represent the wealthy and the powerful. When you got one family and a few other billionaires spending more money than either the Democratic or Republican parties, you know what? That's not democracy. That is oligarchy. We will not accept that. A lot of talk about Supreme Court nominees. Let me make it very clear. No nominee of mine to the Supreme Court will get that position unless he or she is prepared to state loudly and publicly they will vote to overturn Citizens United. Governor Walker here in Wisconsin has been at war with the trade unions, both public and private. I am an extremely strong supporter of trade unions. And I believe that we will not have a strong middle class unless we have a strong trade union movement. Governor Walker thinks it's a great idea to give huge tax breaks to large profitable corporations and then to cut education. Well, I kind of think exactly opposite. I think it is exactly the right thing to demand that large profitable corporations start paying their fair share of taxes so we can expand education. Governor Walker thinks it is a brilliant idea to deny 120,000 people in this state the benefits of the Affordable Care Act, and that means that those people do not get the health insurance that those of us in Congress fought to make sure they had. I don't think that's a brave idea on the part of the governor. I think that that is an outrageous idea. I think that is putting ideology at the head in front of the needs of so many people in this state. But I'll go further. Not only do I think Republican governors should allow for the expansion of Medicaid, I believe the United States should join the rest of the industrialized world, guarantee health care to all people as a right. And again, getting back to what Tim was saying, and the status quo and how media defines how we think, we are the only major nation on earth not to guarantee health care to all people. Now, I'm on the committee that helped write the Affordable Care Act. It has done a lot of good things. We've done away with so-called pre-existing conditions. That's right. That was a terrible idea given to us by the insurance companies. We have done away with we're now allowing young people to stay on their parents' health insurance plans. We have expanded health insurance to 17 million Americans, and we have done away with discrimination against women in terms of how much they have to pay for their health premiums. Those are all important steps forward. But today, despite those gains, 29 million Americans have zero health insurance. More than that are underinsured with high deductibles and high co-payments. And every day we are getting ripped off by the pharmaceutical industry that charge us the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. You want to hear crazy? Crazy is when 1 out of 5 Americans cannot afford to buy the medicine that their doctors prescribe for them. That is crazy. You go to the doctor because you're sick. Doctor writes out a prescription. You can't afford to fill that prescription. We got senior citizens in Vermont, Wisconsin, all over this country who are cutting their pills in half because they don't have the money to buy the medicine they need. A new drug came out last year, an excellent drug for hepatitis C, which impacts many veterans. Cost of that drug, $1,000 a pill. Okay. Now, despite all of that, we end up spending almost 3 times per person on health care what any other country on earth spends. We spend almost 3 times more than the British. We spend 50% more than the French. We spend a lot more than the Canadians. In my view, therefore, what we have got to do is do what every other country on earth does, major country on earth, and that is pass a Medicare for all single-payer program. Governor Walker is trying to make it harder for women to control their own bodies. I disagree. I believe passionately that women have the right to control their bodies, not the government. Now, one of the areas of disagreement that Secretary Clinton and I have deals with how we raise money for our campaigns. And that's a very important issue because it tells you kind of where that candidate is coming from, whom they are dependent upon. When we began this campaign, we were 3% in the polls. We were about 60 points behind Secretary Clinton. We had no money. We had no political organization. And one of the very first decisions we had to make is, do we do what every other campaign does and establish a super PAC? Well, it took us about 1/10 of a second to agree with you. We do not represent the billionaire class. We don't represent corporate America. We don't represent the fossil fuel industry, the drug companies, Wall Street. We don't represent those entities, and we decided we didn't want their money. We would not establish a super PAC. But what we did has really blown my mind. I never thought that it would be possible. And that is what we went out to the middle class, and we said to the middle class, look, if you want a candidate who is going to stand up to powerful special interests and fight for you, we need your help. And what happened is mind-blowing. Over the last 11 months, we have received more than 6 million individual campaign contributions, unprecedented in American history at this point in a campaign. And by the way, what that means and what is revolutionary about that is that we have showed the world that we can run a campaign without being dependent on big money. Anyone here know what our average contribution is? It's $27. Think about that. $27 is our average contribution. To paraphrase Abraham Lincoln at Gettysburg, this is a campaign of the people, by the people, and for the people. Secretary Clinton has chose to raise her money in a very different way. She established several super PACs. Her largest super PAC reported last month that they had raised $25 million from special interests, including $15 million from Wall Street. Now, every candidate in the history of the world who receives huge amounts of money from special interests, they always say the same thing. Those contributions will not influence me. So the question is, why do those entities make those contributions? Now, you can say whatever you want about Wall Street, and I will say something about Wall Street in a moment. These guys may be crooked, they may be fraudulent, they may be reckless, they may be irresponsible, but they are not dumb. They know how to make investments. And in addition to that, Secretary Clinton, as you know, has given a lot of speeches behind closed doors to Wall Street institutions. And she gets paid $250,000 a speech, which is not a bad day's work, I will say. So I kind of think that if you're going to give a speech for $250,000 a speech, it's probably a pretty fantastic speech, don't you think? It must be a mind-boggling speech. Probably a speech that could solve all of the world's problems. Probably written in Shakespearean prose. So I kind of think that a speech that brilliant, that earth-shattering, should be made available to all of the people. Now, as you know, Secretary Clinton has said, well, yeah, I am prepared. She is prepared to release the transcripts if other people do the same. All right. So are you ready here in Green Bay for a dramatic announcement? This is it. It's a very dramatic announcement. Don't breathe. Here it comes. I accept the challenge. I am prepared. No, I am prepared to release all of the transcripts of all of the speeches that I have given on Wall Street. And that is pretty easy because there were no speeches. But, you know, I got my cell phone on, and I'm waiting for that call from Wall Street. And I don't want $250,000 or $25,000 or $2,000 or $2. I don't want anything. But I would like the opportunity to say hello to some of these guys. And this is what I would tell them. I would tell them that as a result of their greed, their unquestionable greed, their recklessness, and their illegal behavior, they drove this country into the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. And as a result of that greed and illegal behavior, millions of Americans lost their jobs, lost their homes, lost their life savings. And many, many of those people have not recovered yet. Now, as you all know, against my vote, Congress bailed out Wall Street because presumably the banks were too big to fail, meaning that if they went under, they'd take a large part of the economy with them. They were bailed out because they were too big to fail, but guess what? Turns out that 3 out of the 4 largest banks in this country today are bigger than they were when we bailed them out because they were too big to fail. Turns out that the 6 largest financial institutions in this country today have assets equivalent to 58% of the gross domestic product of America, over $10 trillion. 6 banks. Turns out that these 6 banks issue 2/3 of the credit cards in this country. 2 out of the 3 credit cards the people in this room have issued by one of the 6 top banks, and they write about 1/3 of the mortgages in America. In other words, you have a small group of people who have incredible economic and political power. And in my view, when you have such a small group of people with so much power, it is time to break them up. And I want to say another word which combines the issue of criminal justice, which is clearly a broken system in America today, with Wall Street. A couple of months ago, Goldman Sachs, one of the large financial institutions on Wall Street, reached a settlement with the United States government for $5 billion. They reached that settlement because obviously they were guilty of selling worthless packages of subprime mortgage loans. Now, if some kid in Wisconsin today gets arrested for possession of marijuana, that kid will have a police record for the rest of his life. Okay? That's right. And that's exactly right. And having a police record is no joke. It means you go in, you look for a job, it becomes harder to get that job. But there is not one executive on Wall Street, not one, whose illegal behavior drove this country into a terrible recession that will have a criminal record. That is wrong. Together, we're going to bring back justice to the criminal justice system. And while we're on the issue of criminal justice, let me just say this. This is something that Tim Robbins has been working hard on. We have in America today, shamefully, more people in jail than any other country on earth. 2.2 million people. We spend $80 billion a year locking up fellow Americans. That is something that together we are going to change. We're going to get to the cause of why people get in jail, and we are going to significantly lower the number of people who are in jail. Now, what does that mean? What it means is, for a start, you got to look at things like youth unemployment in this country, something the media does not talk about at all. Here's the fact. Today, for kids who are between 17 and 20 who graduated high school, I'm not talking about a dropout here, graduated high school, those kids are white, 33% of them are unemployed or underemployed. Latino, 36%, African American, 51% of those kids unemployed or underemployed. And if anybody here thinks there's not a correlation between that outrageous high rate of unemployment and the fact that we have more people in jail than any other country, I think you are missing the point. And that is why I believe fervently that we have got to invest in education and jobs for our young people, not jails or incarceration. All of us are tired of looking at videos on television of unarmed people, often people of color, being shot by police officers. Now, I am a former mayor. I've worked hard with police officers in my own city, in my own state, and all over this country. Vast majority of the police officers in this country are honest, they are hardworking, and they are doing a very, very difficult job. But like any other public official, if a police officer breaks the law, that officer must be held accountable. We have also got to take a hard look at the so-called war on drugs. Now, I know this is controversial, not everybody will agree with me, but here's where I'm coming from. Over the last 30 or so years, millions of Americans have received criminal records for possession of marijuana. Okay? Millions. Now, right now, today, under the Federal Controlled Substance Act, marijuana is listed as a Schedule I drug, the highest level, right alongside of heroin. Now, you can argue, and scientists do, the pluses and minuses of marijuana, but nobody thinks that marijuana is the equivalent of a killer drug like heroin. And that is why I have introduced legislation to take marijuana out of the Federal Controlled Substance Act. States make the decision as to whether to legalize marijuana or not, but it should not be a federal crime. And when we talk about drugs, let me tell you what I think most of you already know. I will tell you that in my state, neighboring New Hampshire, and states all over this country, we are facing a major crisis in heroin and opiate addiction. And every day, every single day, people are dying from drug overdoses. Now, the way we have got to handle that crisis seems to me to be moving forward in saying that substance abuse and addiction should not be treated as a criminal issue, but as a health issue. And what that requires is a revolution in the way we do mental health treatment in this country. In America today, not only do you have God knows how many people addicted to drugs who need help, but you have thousands of people who are walking the streets of our country who are suicidal or who are homicidal. We must make mental health treatment available to people who need it when they need it, not 6 months from now. Secretary Clinton and I also strongly disagree on the issue of trade. Now, trade is not a sexy issue. It's not an issue media talks about much. It is an enormously important issue, which has impacted millions of families in this country over the last 30 years. It is clear to me that our trade policies of NAFTA, CAFTA, permanent normal trade relations with China have cost us millions of decent-paying jobs. All right? It is true, I was just in Janesville earlier today, and as you may remember, in 2008, General Motors shut down its manufacturing plant there. Thousands of people lost their jobs, and many of those jobs went to Mexico. Throughout your state, plants have shut down. Throughout my state, the same thing. We need a trade policy that tells corporate America they've got to reinvest in this country, not just in low-wage countries all over the world. I have helped lead the opposition to every one of these disastrous trade agreements. Secretary Clinton has supported virtually all of them. Secretary Clinton and I strongly disagreed on the war in Iraq. Tim Robbins is right. That war has been a disaster for our country and for the Middle East in general. I heard what Bush and Cheney and all the rest had to say. I didn't believe them. I voted against that war. Secretary Clinton voted for that war. One of the growing issues that we are going to have to deal with, a very serious issue, is whether or not we're going to have enough clean drinking water in this country and around the world. That is why I am opposed to fracking, and I want fracking phased out. As Secretary of State, Secretary Clinton actively pushed the technology of fracking to many countries throughout the world. This campaign is doing well because we are listening to ordinary Americans and not just wealthy campaign contributors. We are listening to workers who tell me every day that they cannot make it on $8 or $9 an hour, and that is why we're going to have to raise the minimum wage in this country to a living wage, $15 an hour. This campaign is listening to senior citizens and disabled veterans, and what they are telling me is they cannot make it on $11,000 or $12,000 a year Social Security. And you know what? Nobody can make it on $12,000 a year Social Security. Despite that, my Republican colleagues in the Senate, many of them, want to cut Social Security benefits. Well, I've got some very bad news for them. We're not going to cut Social Security. We're going to expand Social Security benefits. This campaign is listening to women. And what women are telling me is that they are tired of working for 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. And they are right. And that is why I know that every man in this room will stand with the women in the fight for pay equity. This campaign is listening to people who don't often get listened to, and that is young people. You know what young people are telling me? They're saying, you know, Bernie, our parents, our teachers, everybody said we should get the best education we should. Okay? And they're right, we should. And everybody tells us we live in a highly competitive global economy and America doesn't succeed unless we have the best educated workforce in the world. And that's right. But why does it have to be that after we go to college we come out $30,000, $50,000, $70,000 in debt? Why do we have to spend decades, in some cases, paying off those debts? Talked to a guy in Nevada some months ago, 55 years of age. He's been paying off his student debt for 25 years. He's more deeply in debt today than when he took out the debt in the first place. Talked to a mom in New Hampshire. She's paying off her kids' student loans while she's still paying off her own student loans. Talked to a kid in Iowa, $60,000 in debt after 2 years in college, dropped out. Okay? So the point is that we should not be punishing our young people for getting an education. We should be rewarding those young people. And that means doing two things. Number one, rethinking what public education in America means today. Throughout the history of this country, what we have always had, which was very important, free public education, first grade through 12th grade. I went to public schools, first grade through high school. Very good. But the world has changed. The economy has changed. Technology has changed, and the young people today need more education than used to be the case in order to get a good job. In fact, you can argue that a college degree today is the equivalent of what a high school degree was 50 years ago. Yep. 50 years ago, you had a high school degree, you can go out and get a pretty good job. Today, you often need a college degree to do the same, and that is why I believe that we must make, when we talk about public education, public colleges and universities tuition free. And when we talk about student debt, of which millions of people are now carrying, millions of people are deeply indebted because of going to college or graduate school, I think it is time to say to those people that you can refinance your loans at the lowest possible interest rates you can find. Now, a lot of my establishment critics, they say, well, Bernie, you know, you're Santa Claus, you're just a nice guy. You know, you're giving away all of this free public college tuition and free tuition at public universities, and you're going to lower student debt. How are you going to pay for it? And this requires thinking outside of the box again. When Wall Street's greed and illegal behavior nearly destroyed this economy, Congress bailed them out, right? That's what the big money interests told us had to happen. I voted against that, but that's what happened, okay? Now it seems to me that we should be imposing a tax on Wall Street speculation. And that will raise more than enough money to make public colleges and universities tuition free. And to lower student debt. Now, Wall Street may not like it, but it seems to me that we bailed them out. Now it is their time to help the middle class of this country. This campaign is listening to people whose voices are not often heard. We're listening to the Latino community, and they are saying, with 11 million undocumented people in this country, they are tired of being exploited, tired of living in the shadows. They want, and I agree with them, a comprehensive immigration reform bill and a path toward citizenship. We are listening to the African American community, and they are asking, how does it happen that we can spend trillions of dollars on a war in Iraq, we can give tax breaks to billionaires, but somehow we cannot rebuild the inner cities of America? And they are right. I was in Flint, Michigan, 6 weeks ago. And what I heard from parents in Flint, what I saw with my own eyes, was beyond comprehension. I literally could not believe that I was hearing things taking place like Flint in the United States of America in the year 2016. It was like a third world country, okay? But it's not just Flint. We have hundreds of communities all over this country are struggling with inadequate water systems, with inadequate wastewater plants. My state of Vermont, our bridges are in bad need of repair. Roads all over this country are crumbling. Our rail system is falling behind many other countries. Our levees, our dams need massive work. We can and we should invest at least $1 trillion rebuilding our infrastructure, creating 13 million decent-paying jobs. This campaign is listening to people who almost never get heard, and that is people in the Native American community. This is a community of people who have been lied to, cheated, and treaties that have been negotiated in good faith have been abrogated from almost day one when the first settlers came to this country. We owe the Native American people more than we can ever pay back. Some of the best aspects of our culture come from them, and we have learned a great deal about the environment from the Native American people. And what they have taught us is that we are part of nature, and we've got to live with nature. And that if human beings on this planet are going to survive, we cannot destroy nature. Which takes me to another issue of global consequence. I am a member of the Senate Committee on the Environment, and I've talked to scientists in our country and scientists all over the world. The debate is over. Climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity. Climate change is already causing devastating problems in our country and around the world. We as adults, as parents, as grandparents, we have the moral responsibility to make certain that we leave this planet in a way that is healthy and habitable to our children and our grandchildren. We have got to take on the fossil fuel industry, whose greed is causing enormous damage. We've got to tell them that their short-term profits are not more important than the future of this planet. We've got to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. And when we do that, and when we move to energy efficiency and wind, solar, geothermal, and other sustainable technologies, we create millions of good-paying jobs. As I said earlier, I believe that health care is a right, and if elected president, we will fight together to create a Medicare for all single-payer program guaranteeing health care to every man, woman, and child in this country. Okay, my friends, all of you know that tomorrow is an enormously important primary day here in Wisconsin. And as I said earlier, what this campaign has shown me is that we do very, very well when the voter turnout is high. That means when working people, many of whom have given up on the political process, so angry and disgusted with what's going on in Washington, they don't want to participate. But if those people are prepared to come back in and stand up and fight for their kids and their parents, and if young people, many of whom have never participated in an election before, come out and vote, and middle-class families, we can win tomorrow if there is a large voter turnout. So I am asking you not only to come out to vote tomorrow, I'm asking you to bring your aunts and your uncles and your brothers and your sisters and your friends and your co-workers and everybody you know. If we have a large voter turnout, we can put Wisconsin in the ranks of those states who are fighting for a political revolution. Thank you all very much for coming out today. Let's win tomorrow. Thank you.
There's a